Okay, well, greetings. This is meant to be, as the first Trojan Adventuring Party workshop, this is meant to be a very casual introductory guide for beginners to the game. We had a lot of respondents saying that they felt intimidated by the massive rule structure. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to run down the two pillars of things, basics to learn in Dungeons and Dragons. And that first pillar is everything that you learn making a character sheet. And then that second pillar is the combat rules. To that end, my plan is to make two functional level 5 characters. And I've picked them out ahead of time just so that we can run down rules about ability scores, about race, about proficiency bonus, stats, skills, secondary attributes. We can cover feats, spells known, spell slots, that kind of thing. Okay, so we have here a character that we'll be making an elven archer with. So we'll go ahead and we will be using D&D Beyond for our resource page, but I will be showing you how to input all of this manually so that you're not dependent on their system for making your character sheets, because that does cost something, and they provide the PDFs that you can download and print for free. As mentioned, I will be making an elven archer, so we will be picking a fighter for our basic class. We're just looking to build a basic fighter here, and as I mentioned, it is at 5th level, so we will be covering how to write in your class features such as Second Wind or Action Surge, as well as picking out a subclass, Martial Archetype, on the fighter. We'll cover ability score improvement, and extra attack, because those are things that are likely to come up in most games. The first thing that we want to start with for our Elven Fighter is the proficiency bonus. The proficiency bonus is a basic number that applies to all D&D characters. I showed it there it was there on the left of the fighter table, but it does not vary between the tables for different classes. The proficiency bonus is standard for all D&D characters and depends on your level. For a level 5 character, the proficiency bonus is +3. Effectively, it drives everything that you do, everything that you are proficient in, at any rate. Proficiency represents some degree of skill or training in a particular weapon, a particular skill, or a particular type of saving throw. Whenever you are proficient in something, you may add your proficiency bonus, +3 in this case, to that particular skill or saving throw or what have you. So let's start with some of the givens for the class. Now, every class has two, so you see class features here. Your proficiencies, you have all armor and shields. You have proficiencies in simple weapons and martial weapons. So any kind of weapon that you find, you'll be able to add your proficiency bonus to it. Armor, in this case, does not have so much to do with the proficiency bonus. It's more about the viability of wearing it. To simplify, think of it like you can't wear armor that you're not proficient in. But you see these, the saving throws, strength and constitution. Now, saving throws, which are in the upper left corner near the statistics, they represent certain defensive abilities that you have, and they are defensive abilities against effects. If you are, in combat or in a dangerous situation, there are two kinds of things that can generally happen to you. Either an enemy can swing a giant sword or fire an arrow at you or so forth, in which case they'll attack against your armor class, Or it might be the kind of deal where maybe they're launching a fireball into the whole area. And so that fireball is definitely going to affect you. But what degree depends on whether you make your saving throw. So the basic breakdown of defensive capabilities is armor class, how hard you are to hit, saving throw, how strong your defenses are. Now, I mention this directly after the proficiency bonus because every class has two proficiencies, one in two different saving throws. The fighter's saving throws are strength and constitution. When you will use these particular saving throws will be prompted by your DM. Different traps, different spells, different class features, different actions that your enemy can take or that the environment can inflict on you will necessitate different saving throws. And your DM will tell you which one. Being proficient in these saving throws basically means that you get to add your proficiency bonus to it. So that's very simple. You'll take whatever your strength score eventually is, and you'll add 3 to it. You'll take whatever your constitution score eventually is, and you'll add 3 to it. Whereas something like dexterity or intelligence, you would just take what the score is. Since we are kind of moving on to a world of stats and skills, what you are proficient in and how much extra ability you have besides that, let's go down a rundown of the statistics real quick. We have strength, which is all about physical power and might. Strength is, broadly speaking, what you associate it with in everyday language. Strength will drive a lot of melee attacks, attacks with heavier, more damaging weapons. However, it won't do a lot else. There is only one strength-based skill you notice here. It will be called on a lot. It's what you're looking for if you're trying to burst down doors or things like that. But for the most part, strength is only about physical force. It is about lifting things, and it is about hitting things hard. Since we are making an archer, strength isn't particularly important for us, but we'll get to that when we roll stats. Dexterity influences a great deal of the things in the game. Dexterity is about nimbleness, litheness, quickness, how accurately and deftly you can move. It's used for ranged weapon attacks, and it is used to help calculate your armor class, how well you can dodge out of the way of things. Constitution is somehow has both the most limited application and the most important application. Constitution gives you health. The more constitution you have, the more health you have at any given point. Intelligence is all about recall, knowledge skills, as well as some of the softer skills. You can generally divide intelligence into two categories of things that it's good at. The first is hard data and knowledge. So if you need to make a yes or no, I know what the history of this realm is, or I don't. I know this castle's architect, or I don't. That is generally intelligence. Besides that, there is investigation, which is kind of its own category of skills in here. And investigation broadly allows you to make logical deductions, allows you to process of elimination, figure out where something might be. A DM might call for an investigation check if you're looking closely for an object or a perturbance, or something like that. If you're looking for something specifically and trying to make logical deductions about it, all of that more processing element of intelligence, investigation will cover that. So processing and raw recall. And I should mention, because we are blending the skills and the raw abilities a little bit, I should mention that dexterity is important for a number of skills as well. You see stealth down here, sleight of hand, and acrobatics. These are all sort of softer physical skills. Stealth, sleight of hand, acrobatics, all of those are good for traversing terrain, either silently or if it's difficult terrain to cross, say a crevice or a chasm that you need to walk over a thin line over, that will be under the purview of dexterity. So moving to wisdom. Wisdom is a lot about the practical application of knowledge. It's about noticing what is there in front of you rather than necessarily getting caught up in your head and making logical deductions about everything. It's about staying present. It is about being grounded, and it is about more rural kind of skills. So you have skills like survival, you have skills like medicine put under here, animal handling. All of those are the kind of skills that you get from somebody who lives off the land, somebody who is particularly in touch with the world around them, and that's represented by wisdom. As well, that present focused element of wisdom, that discerning gaze at the world around you, is represented by insight and perception. Perception is literally just noticing things around you. Where investigation was searching for something, perception is just, do you see this thing in the room? Do you notice that something is different? And insight is about determining someone else's intention. So it's a very useful, very practical skill to have. Insight and perception are some of the most commonly called for skills in the game. And finally, charisma. In the 3 pillars of D&D, which is combat, exploration, and social interactions, charisma is the stat that is most necessary for an entire column. Charisma is everything about social interactions. It determines how well you are able to navigate convincing someone, whether by deception or by force of personality, bullying them, or by making a persuasive case for your particular side. Charisma can also motivate a lot of the spell casting classes. Intelligence and wisdom can both motivate spell casting classes, but charisma has them outnumbered. Charisma motivates bards spell casting, paladins, sorcerers, and warlocks. So it has a lot of application, but it's also a very easy stat to dump for characters that don't necessarily need it, because what you are giving up is essentially, if you don't have charisma spellcasting, you're giving up abilities as a face for the party. You are gambling with how well social interactions will turn out for you when you bump or detract from your charisma. So with that in mind, with that lengthy explanation out of the way, let's go ahead and determine our stats and our skills as well. So moving over here, we have an online dice roller, and there are a number of ways of adjudicating ability scores, but the most popular way is to roll 4d6 die and drop the lowest one. And this is a pretty good score. So we have a 15. And the other ways to do this are, there is a standard array, which you can look up. If you look up D&D 5e standard array, and there is also point by, which will give you a set number of points and a formula for where those points can be applied. But it is most popular to roll because it allows for more unique stats, and the characters don't all feel quite the same. Everybody loves the inherent reward, or the risk reward, I should say, of rolling for stats. So there are 6 stats, and you roll 6 times. 4d6, drop the lowest. These stats will be determined in some way by other choices that you make. You can apply these stats wherever you want, and you can change them around at any point before you decide you are finished with your character. Okay, so we have a 15, a 15, a 10, a 7, a 14, and a 13, which is pretty decent overall. We don't have an enormous spike in one category. Generally, if you get a 16 to 18 in any particular place, you're going to have an incredibly good predominant skill. But this certainly gives you enough. 15 is the highest you can go on the standard array. So this certainly, and point by, so this certainly gives you enough to work with for a character. And here is, I mentioned briefly that your stats would be influenced by something else, and that is your race. I wish that I could explain all of these rules in discrete packages and go into the race at different points. However, the way these rules work is all in interaction with each other. So you sort of have to follow this non-formulaic path, or this non-linear path. Your different race, and I mentioned that this would be an elf, your different races change what your stats will be after you rolled them. There are some recent expansions to the rules that let you just apply whatever stat increases you want, basically, within a standard formula. But in the classical way to play, which it depends based on your table, based on your dungeon master and the rules they set out, different races have different ability score improvements. We've chosen elf in this case because dexterity, our primary stat, is going to be increased by 2. So let's go over here. I mentioned that if we want it to be an archer, dexterity should be our best stat. I will go ahead and we'll make that, put our 15 there. It's increased by 2. So that is a 17. That is our dexterity stat. And the stat is different than the modifier. Your modifier is dependent on what your stat is. A basic rundown, 3 to 4 is, or 3 and below is a -4. 4 to 5 is a -3. 6 to 7 is a -2. 8 to 9 is a -1. 10 and 11 are both neutral. 12 and 13 +1. 14 and 15 +2. 16 and 17 +3. and 18 and 19 plus 4, 20 plus 5. Beyond, there are, if you get crazy magic items later in the game, you will be able to increase your modifier beyond that. The modifier drives everything that you do. This is a D20 system, so the modifier is naturally what you turn to, not the 17. The reason that these scores are separate is so that different effects can work on your different skills without necessarily boosting them all the way, so that you have to be a little bit clever. So you remember we rolled a 15 for our dexterity. Now we have that +2 dexterity, which is guaranteed to bump it by a full point. But if we had a race with just a +1 dexterity, and say a +2 constitution or something like that, if we wanted to say, I'm fine with just that +3, I don't want to edge it closer to the 18, it might behoove us to just bump it up from a 15 to a 16, get that +3, and invest a +2 racial stat somewhere else. I know this is all very esoteric at the moment, but the general design principle is to have gradients in the actual stat that influence your modifier. That way, you can do partial bumps to your general stat that will eventually, if you do it cleverly, but not necessarily, affect your modifier. Okay. At any rate, we now have to decide where our secondary stat will be located. We have another 15 here. And let's go ahead. I mentioned that thing about bumping it up by 1. Let's see. I'd say Constitution, for me personally, is the second most important stat for a fighter. So let's see if any of the sub-races will grant us a bonus to Constitution. Generally, what you're looking at for races is there will be a standard +2, and then if they have sub-races, which will grant them certain abilities, and you can look at all of the particulars in D&D Beyond. We won't try and run through all of them. You will be overwhelmed by a plethora of options, no matter what path you go down, and it's best to just kind of pick one. But let's go ahead and go for, I like the Shadark High better than the Sea Elf. The Shadark High has a increase of Constitution, which we can apply that +1 to our 15. Go ahead, make it a 16 here. Okay, so we have applied all of our racial ASIs, and we've crossed off 15 and 15. We get a 14, a 13, a 10, and a 7. Now, this is where you start wanting to develop kind of a concept for your character. I mean, all of these mechanics are great, but you want a personality and a backbone for them. So let's say I want this guy, he's a Shadark High, he's from the Shadowfell, he emerged from the land of death, and he has a gloomy appearance that reflects that. I will go ahead and put my worst skill in Charisma, because I value the other ones more for this character, and that will be a -2 to all charisma checks. Now that 10, and notice I stopped going chronologically or from top to bottom, because I'm filling out my weaknesses at this point. After filling out my strengths, I wanted to fill out what some of my areas to be desired would be. Strength, I don't necessarily need for a lot. It would be nice to maybe have a stronger strength saving throw, because I do get a free proficiency in that, but that would really be the only benefit for strength for me, because I am an archer. I work from afar. I don't have a giant greatsword or anything that I require a great amount of force to wield. Which leaves us with intelligence and wisdom. Wisdom is a more practical skill, so I will go ahead and put that 14 that we had in there. Intelligence, you know, it's nice to have. We'll put the 13 in it. Okay. There we go. So that's one of the easiest parts, determining all of your modifiers and your stats. And so we can apply these appropriately. We have things that we're proficient in, so we'll see how those stack up. We have a +3 proficiency bonus, and our strength is +0. So if we're proficient in strength saving throws, 3 + 0, go ahead and have a +3 strength saving throw. If a giant bull runs towards us and we have to make a strength saving throw or else avoid being knocked to the ground, we'll have a +3 on that roll. Constitution. If we are perhaps poisoned or hit with a ray of necromancy that brings down our general health, we'll have a +6 to resist that, which is pretty nice. And we can apply this logic to skills. Now, skills are different non-combat things that your DM can call for. I mentioned investigation, insight, perception, all of those from earlier. And now, which skills you get active access to is not just a matter of your own personal choice. It also depends on your class, and in some cases your race. Elves in particular get an automatic proficiency in the perception skill. So we don't have to worry about that, because that's definitely one of the ones that I would have taken. Makes sense as a sniper and for practical reasons. So we get to choose 2 skills from this list, and we will get 2 more later from our background, but these are the ones that are kind of tied to our fighter origin and the skills we have as a fighter. Now, if I'm perhaps feeling a little bit underwhelmed with my strength score, but I remember that a lot of strength scores, a lot of strength skills call for athletics, I might want to go ahead and take proficiency in the athletics skill. It's important to note that you can take proficiency in skills that you have that you don't have a plus in, or even have a negative in. You just add them together additively with your proficiency bonus. If I wanted to take intimidation, for example, despite my negative charisma, you know, I could take that and then I would add my -2 and my +3 and would come out to a +1, despite the fact that my elf man here is an incredibly unlikable individual. For our second skill of choice, I teased earlier that insight was particularly useful, but, you know, we have this archer kind of vibe. I kind of think that maybe a tracker would be nice. A character who tracks through the wilderness to try and seek out his enemies. So I will go ahead and choose proficiency in survival so that I can handle that a little bit better. Perfect. So we have 3 skills right off the bat. At this point, with our skills chosen and the business of proficiency bonuses and ability scores pretty much covered, we're going to go ahead and move on to some other non-class abilities that you get, which are generally pretty low level, but important boosts to every level 1 character. One of these is backgrounds. Let's go ahead and pick something from the basic rules, and backgrounds are meant to represent your backstory as a character. Now, I come from the Shadowfell. I'm a little bit of an outsider, so I will go ahead and pick Far Traveler, which gives me insight and perception. So I get proficiency and insight, and every character gets a background. So you will get 2 skills of your depending on the background that you choose. And don't feel constrained by the background options that are there. In the player's handbook, it does say you may create your own custom background for the skills that you want. You always get 2 skills from every background, as well as either 2 tool proficiencies or 2 languages, or a language and a tool proficiency. Tool proficiencies are things like chess sets or maybe alchemist's tools or things like that. Another thing to note is that we already have proficiency in perception. Backgrounds allow you to swap it out. The goal is not to limit you with backgrounds. The goal is to bring you up to par as far as skills go. So, with perception already taken care of, we are pretty much left with taking whatever skill we want. I am going to go ahead and pick stealth because we have a high dexterity anyway, and it's a useful skill to have. Yeah, so that'll be our best skill because of the dexterity bonus and the proficiency bonus. Okay. This also, while we're talking about skills, we should talk about passive perception, which is one of the only passive abilities that is on the sheet. It's very simple. It's a DM tool. It is 10 plus your proficiency bonus. And it is about whether you notice things sneaking up on you, basically, or whether you notice things without having to make a check. Okay, so we have all of our skills and everything picked out. So we will go ahead and move on to some elf features that we get. And the races give you some baseline things to be aware of. First off, your size is medium. That just means the normal human size. Effectively, you won't have to worry about it. There is no way to become size large. You can only be size medium or size small. Size small characters move slower and they can't wield heavy weapons without having a disadvantage. However, they also, in some variant rules, get to climb larger creatures, so that is fun. Our base speed is 30 feet. That's how much we can move and around with our standard move action. And we get some racial abilities, such as dark vision, which allows us to see basically in black and white in darkness. So we will go ahead and put that under features and traits. We also get Fey Ancestry and Trance, and these are neat little side abilities that you get. Trance allows you to keep watch while you're sleeping, basically, and Fey Ancestry gives you advantage against effects meant to, basically influence your will. So these are minor benefits, kind of akin to the background benefits, the extra 2 skills. They are nothing that will make your character, necessarily. No race is meant to be the game-breaking race, that you must play this race if you want to play a proper example of this archetype. The general idea is that they give you neat little extra abilities based on their lore or what mythology surrounds them, and then from there you can, ideally they're small abilities that you get to use in creative ways. So, moving on to the bulk rules here. We start talking about class features, and class features are an essential for your class. Class features define how your gameplay works. Some of them are features that you get to choose in between. Fighting style, for example, choose one of the following options. Well, we're obviously going to choose archery, and you just follow the page down. Second wind, action surge. I've already taken the liberty of copying those in down there, as well as choosing a martial archetype. Now, all classes in 5th edition have a subclass that you can choose at 1st, 2nd, or 3rd level, depending on what class you're playing. For fighters and for most classes, it is found at 3rd level. And you get a lot of different options that enhance your playstyle. Arcane Archer, you get to fire magical bolts. Battle Master, you get to pull tactical maneuvers on the battlefield every time you strike with a weapon. Cavalier is about taunting your enemies, making sure that they are distracted and making sure that you can defend your allies. Champion is a straightforward, you get an extra fighting style, your critical hits, the hits where you really, really hit hard, are more common, and you get into these esoteric, weird niche subclasses too, like Echo Knight, where you can create a copy of yourself, or Rune Knight, where you study the magic of giants and carve runic giant magic onto your gear so that you can find a number of benefits that are themed around different giant types. But we'll just go with the broadest. We'll go with Champion. And I said we're making a level 5 character, so just read what comes up to level 5. In this case, the 3rd level, improved critical. Weapon attack, score critical hit on a roll of 19 or 20. And that is included here. Okay, so we have core class features down, and how you determine those is very simple. You go down your class page, you make sure that you write them all in. Most class features, some of them are passive. They'll give you things like the elves' dark vision. They'll give you something that's always active, like archery. We are always going to get that +2 to hit for all ranged weapons. On the other hand, certain class features are active, which means that you need to spend some part of your turn in order to use them. These are things like Second Wind, or Action Surge, which doesn't have a cost, just a limited number of times that you can do it. You have to choose to do it. Action Surge, you get to take 2 actions in a row, or on your turn. Not necessarily in a row. You can break it up how you want. You can move in between. You can take a bonus action in between. We'll cover all of the action rules and your combat actions at a later point. Okay, so perfect. With all of the class features covered, let's move on to some more specific fighter class features covered. Let's move on to some of the more universal class features. Ability score improvements. These happen at 4th level, 8th level, 12th level, 16th, and 19th level for all classes. A fighter gets some extra ones at 6th and at 14th. That's a special ability of the fighters. The idea is that they will just have some crazy stats or crazy benefits on account of the way they are just this. They are not necessarily magic. They are just this standard person facing off against gods and monsters and all of that, so that their stats need to stack up crazy high. But an ability score improvement is pretty much determined like this. You get 2 points on your ASI, ability score improvement. You can spend those 2 points on one score. For instance, if we wanted to bump the 17 to a 19, which would be a +4. Or you can split them up, 1 to 2 different scores. If I wanted to bump this 17 to an 18, which is still a +4, and then bump up my intelligence to a 14, which is a +2, I would be increasing 2 modifiers. Or I could bring the charisma up to a -1, but I think it's more with the character that we're building out to go ahead, take this score, bump up this dexterity, and we have some very, very solid secondary scores here. We have an 18 that we can potentially bump to a 20 as soon as 6th level. And then we also have these solid +2s from intelligence and wisdom. And this brings up all of these other stats. We chose a lot of wisdom-based stats. Oh, wait, yeah. Yeah, if we had chosen an intelligence-based stat, it brings up our stealth. If we had chosen an intelligence-based stat, such as history, it would have brought up that as well. Secondly, at 5th level, the martial classes, such as fighter, get this thing called extra attack. An extra attack, you are allowed to attack twice instead of once whenever you make the attack action on your turn. So we'll go ahead and fill that in with attacks and spellcasting. Extra attack. It's exactly what it sounds like. That is the point when the tiers of combat and when your power level really starts to jump up, because you are effectively doubling much of your damage output per round. And that's the same level that other classes that don't get extra attack get some of their mightier powers or magical abilities. The idea is that at certain levels that are kind of standardized between different classes, levels like 5th and around 10th and 11th and around 17th, at all of those points, there tends to be a large jump in power. At this point, it's around time to determine some of the secondary attributes. What we have is armor class and initiative left to determine, as well as hit dice and hit points. You can also add in languages and equipment, which are related. The equipment related specifically to armor class. So, initiative, this is very easy. This is your dexterity modifier. Initiative is how quickly you go in combat. You roll a d20, you add your initiative, and that is the final result. Whoever has a higher number goes first. Armor class. Now, as mentioned before, your dexterity, which is very high, has an impact on your armor class. And how that works is there are 3 levels of armor. If we go over to the equipment and gear section, we go ahead to armor. You see some of this is credited as medium armor, some of it as heavy armor, some of it as light armor. And the fighter class in the class features section at the beginning gives us chainmail or leather armor. So we'll just go with that. You'll probably have better stuff by level 5, but we'll go with what the standard we could get is without spending any gold. So chainmail is AC 16. Leather is AC 11. The reason why we would ever consider leather over chainmail is because of the rules of heavy, medium, and light armor. Light armor has no strength requirement, and you are allowed to add all of your dexterity modifier to it. So if we have this leather armor, AC 11, we go ahead and we can bring it up to an AC of 15 and be entirely unencumbered, not have to invest any strength. Medium armor, on the other hand, it doesn't offer us any, but say if we went for a chain shirt, that's an AC of 13, and we get to add our dexterity modifier up to a maximum of 2 with medium armor. So again, we could bring it up to 15. And there would be no strength requirement for medium armor. For heavy armor, on the other hand, there is a strength requirement. Chainmail in particular requires a strength of at least 13. Some of them require as high as 15. You also are not allowed to add your dexterity modifier at all. That is why the ACs are so much higher. In general, leather, you can get up to studded leather with light armor, which brings you, if you have a +5 dexterity, to around 17. That is not as good as the heaviest armor because you need to invest so much more into it. So we'll go ahead and we will get ourselves some leather armor. That will bring us to an AC of 15. At this point, we are almost done. Aside from character concept stuff that you can choose for roleplay reasons, like the language, choosing if you want to choose your equipment, you can do so from the starting equipment that is granted by your class, and then some stuff that is given by your background, such as this set of traveler's clothes, with a musical instrument, etc., etc., etc. All of that is individual choices that you can make. The other major thing, and it's very, very simple, the other major thing to do is to determine your hit points, how much you can really take before you are entirely dropped. You fall unconscious and you begin to die. This is an important tracking part of combat. Now, how it works is you roll for hit points and you add your Constitution modifier every time you do. How much you roll depends on your class and your level. So it says a hit dice up here, 1d10, which is one of the largest ones, per fighter level. We have 5 fighter levels, so we have 5d10. At first level, we automatically get 10, the maximum amount. So we start with 13. Past there, we roll 4d10. 23, perfect. So we have 13 plus 23 is going to be 36. And then we add that extra 3 for all of those 4 levels, which will be another 12. So we have a total of, for this guy, 48 hit points. Now there are some house rules about hit points, things about never taking less than half of the hit dice, but those are not in the official rules. So always check with your dungeon master before the hit dice rolling. Those house rules are popular because they allow classes with a higher hit dice to consistently perform better on these rolls than classes with a lower hit dice. You don't want your wizard to be tankier than your barbarian. But it is a house rule, so you will have to check. Similarly, this hit dice thing down here, that represents how many you have, how many for your level. 5d10. You just fill in the dice that you rolled and how many of them that you rolled. And with that, with the addition of things like your class level and your name, Elvis. With those additions, we are almost entirely ready. When you choose your equipment, you are allowed to pick out a set of weapons. We will go ahead and just for right now, write down the longbow. And you can look up all of the different equipment. Most of it you will memorize pretty quickly. For example, the longbow is a d8 damage. And you, when you fire that longbow, will strike with your arrow and do d8 damage plus your dexterity modifier. That will be d8 plus 4 damage, and you can fire twice per round. Your attack bonus will be equal to, if you are proficient in the weapon, your proficiency bonus plus your stat that you use for it. And in our case, because we went ahead and got archery, another +2. So we have a total of +9 to hit with this longbow. And you can get secondary weapons. You can get, say, a short sword, which also uses your dexterity. You can get a crossbow if you want a slightly shorter range weapon, that kind of thing. But for the most part, this, I hope, was a good general review of how the game works, run through the prospect of making this character. Here we have moved on to a bit of an adversary for our Elven Archer. I went ahead and I rolled the stats ahead of time. I chose the skills, calculated the saving throws and all of that ahead of time. We have all of our class features written in. We have everything we need except spells, because spells are complicated and no rundown of the rules of Dungeons and Dragons would be complete without the beginning of tackling them. So we have chosen to make this guy a wizard, which means that we will have a certain amount of magical power that is granted by our level. Particularly, magical power is represented by spell slots. These are different than the spells that you know. Spells known and spell slots are a different affair. Spells known are what spells they are. Stuff like Magic Missile or Fireball, those effects that you hear. Spell slots are the amount of magical power that you possess. They are the limited magical resource within yourself that you can expend in order to fire off these enormous magical miracles that you do. At 5th level, we have spell slots. We have 4 of 1st level, 3 of 2nd level, and 2 of 3rd level. So we have a nice spread there. There, it's represented 1st, 4th, 2nd 3, 3rd 2. This is different than spells known. Now, I've chosen Wizard because it's the most complicated one to try and grasp how many spells you know. This is because it can change based on how you play the game and what spells you discover in the world. Many classes will just have a spells known column here. Or they will tell you how many from a set list of spells you can prepare at the beginning of any given day. And you can choose from a list. The wizards start with, you have a spell book, which is a repository of the wizard spells you know. You have a spellbook containing 6 first level wizard spells of your choice, and then every single time you gain a level, you gain 2 additional wizard spells of your choice. You get to add them to your book. What's interesting here is that you use here both the spells known and spells prepared mechanic, which is why we're choosing wizard to cover this. The spells known mechanic, how many spells are in your spell book? How many spells you could cast? You could cast ever if you prepared yourself the right way. The spells prepared is about choosing a limited number of spells from a spell list that you have. A class such as a cleric or a druid could just choose those from any choose any spell from their list. A wizard, because they have the most powerful spell list, gets to build their own. So you have 6 plus 2 times your level spells known. On any given day, you have prepared a number of spells equal to your intelligence modifier plus your wizard level. Now, normally, wizards just pick some spells that they like, and they stick with those. But at the end of a long rest, they can swap those out. If you know you're going into a water breathing heavy environment and you want the spell water breathing, you can go ahead and swap that out for another spell that you have. Let's go through the basic mechanic of spell casting. We have the spell save DC and the spell attack modifier. Some spells, when you cast them, are a straightforward ray or blast. You are trying to strike one enemy, and so you'll be making an attack similarly to how you would with a weapon. So as you see here, you add your proficiency bonus and your intelligence modifier. Other spells. I mentioned earlier that a spell like Fireball is going to affect a certain terrain. The question will be how well the enemies can avoid it. I mentioned saving throws and how good your defenses are, but those defenses need to be measured against something. And that something is called a difficulty class, or DC. Your dungeon master, or the monster you are fighting, will set a DC for you to beat. If an enemy is casting a fireball at you, there will be a certain number you have to beat to take half or full damage. Your spell DC is calculated the same way as theirs. You take 8 plus your proficiency bonus plus your intelligence modifier. So we have this guy. He has an intelligence of +4, a proficiency bonus of +3. 8 plus 3 is 11, plus 4 is 15. So we have a spell save DC of 15. Every time someone is affected by a spell that requires a saving throw, which is most of the high level, or pretty much all of the high level spells, and a good deal of the low level spells, they will be rolling against this. The spell attack is secondary. The main thing is people defending against your spells will be defending against your spell save DC. This is just an introductory part of spell casting. This is just an introductory review of the general mechanic of spell casting. If you go over to wizard spells, you will find a dearth of potential choices for you, and they will all have They will have casting times, they will have ranges. Components is its own complicated thing. Those are all things that will vary based on the individual spell, and your DM will help you through figuring out what all of the necessities are for these for this. You see, most of these have a casting time of 1 action. That's the usual rule for most things. Attacking is an action, casting a spell is an action, but others have durations like 1 minute, and a round of combat is a single round of combat takes around 6 seconds, which means that you will not be able to cast a 1-minute spell in the middle of combat because that would take 10 rounds. Some of these take a bonus action, which is like a lesser action that can only be used for certain things. Some of them take a reaction, like this one, for example. When a creature within 60 feet of you falls, you can take a reaction outside of your turn in order to make them feather fall instead and land safely. So all of these spells, we're not trying to pick a full set of spells for our wizard here. That would be a bad idea and get into a complicated business of comparing spells. What we are just trying to do here is tell you how many you have, which at this point, at level 5, will be 14 spells because of the initial 6 plus 2 per level for wizard, how preparing spells works, and how knowing spells works. Finally, in terms of spell casting, I'm sure you've been seeing this referred to as a cantrip. We don't have cantrip spell slots. There are 4 first-level spell slots, 3 third-level spell slots, or 3 second-level spell slots, and 2 third-level spell slots. Cantrips are effectively a fancy word for level 0 spell slots. What it means is you can cast them whenever you want. These are simple spells that you have memorized the formula for, and you can do whenever you want. They still have the action economy cost. They'll still take an action, or normally an action, but sometimes a bonus action or reaction or what have you. But you don't have to expend resources as a spellcaster in order to use them, and they get more powerful as you level up. These are the alternatives that spellcasters have to being able to attack with a martial weapon, like a bow, every single round. So you have cantrips, you have general spell slots, you have spells known, and you have spells prepared. So in terms of things that this workshop did not cover, we did not cover any DM work. We did not cover any ability score adjudication. When you know necessarily, aside from your DM prompting you when to use these skills, we did not cover strategy or how to try and play all of your cards best. And we did not cover action economy, which will be the biggest thing to look up. How you can take your actions in combat. That will be the subject of a later workshop. However, everything that is on the character sheet, everything from initiative to your skills, is covered in this video. This is by no means a coverage of every facet of each of these elements. There are things about dexterity, things about intelligence, all of the skills that will be situational. The game is meant to be a set of complicated general rules that all interact with each other. And exceptions to the rules will always be found. If you are confused by anything here, I would encourage everybody to look up anything that was covered too quickly. We mostly focused on getting through all of the material in the context of a character sheet here. A good rule of thumb is to have a general idea of how the game works, to have all of these words just lodged in your head so that you vaguely remember what the definitions were, and then work with your DM, because the DM will know the rules enough to run the game. You will pick up a lot of knowledge at the table. Don't feel, if you're overloaded, that you can't play the game. Don't feel like none of this is learnable when you are actually playing. It is an improvised game, and learning the rules to it are a part of that improvisation.